Hey Reddit. I'm not sure how to start this, so I'll just jump right in. My name's Ethan, I'm 34, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty normal life. Married to Jessica, who I'd known since college, and with my younger brother Adam, who I thought I was close to. We grew up pretty tight, or at least I thought we did. But looking back now, I realize Adam was always a bit of a golden child in my parents' eyes. No matter what happened, he was the one they doted on, and I was, well, just there. Things between Jess and me had been rough for a while. I didn't know it was anything major at first, just the usual stresses of work, bills, and life wearing us down, or so I thought. She'd been distant, spending more time with friends, getting oddly defensive over little things, and picking fights over nothing. I'd brush it off, tell myself that every marriage has its ups and downs. But something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. I was clueless that Jess and Adam had been meeting up behind my back, and I didn't even realize how deep Adam's jealousy or resentment went. He was acting weird toward me, too, cold one minute, overly friendly the next, almost as if he was trying to throw me off. The worst part? My parents thought I was being paranoid whenever I mentioned any of this. They'd brush me off, say Adam was just going through a phase or that Jess and I needed time apart to appreciate each other. Looking back now, the warning signs were all there, but I ignored them. Little did I know, my whole life was about to unravel, piece by piece. So one night, Jess told me she'd be out late with her friend Sarah. She even threw in some extra detail about how they were planning to go to a new wine bar across town. Normally, I'd just say, okay, have fun, but something didn't sit right this time. Maybe it was because she seemed to be lying so easily, or maybe it was the way she wouldn't look me in the eye. About an hour after she left, I started to feel uneasy. It was like every nerve in my body was telling me to do something about it, even though I knew I'd look like a jealous fool if I was wrong. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed my jacket and drove to that new wine bar. When I got there, it was packed. I looked around, feeling like an idiot as I tried to spot Jess or Sarah. And then, after a few minutes of searching, I realized there was no sign of her. My gut sank. On a whim, I checked the Find My app on my phone. She and I had shared our locations ages ago, mostly for convenience. And that's when I saw it, her location was nowhere near the wine bar. She was parked outside a small, private restaurant across town. My mind was racing. Who was she meeting? Why lie to me? I drove over there and parked a little down the block, trying to collect myself. I could see her car, and just as I was about to turn back and head home, I saw them. Jess and my brother, Adam. They were sitting together in a corner booth through the restaurant window, laughing and leaning in close, like they'd done this 100 times before. I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. I watched them for a few minutes, completely frozen. It was like my mind couldn't process what I was seeing, my wife, with my own brother, acting like I didn't even exist. It was then that I realized my gut had been right all along. I'd been too trusting, too blind to see the betrayal that was right in front of me. I barely remember the drive home. My mind was racing, and I couldn't decide if I was more hurt or angry. All I knew was that I had to confront her, make her explain herself, somehow understand why she'd do this. I waited up, trying to keep my cool, though it felt impossible. She finally walked through the door close to midnight, and the second I saw her, I knew I wouldn't be able to hold back. I asked her, "How was your night with Sarah?" She didn't even flinch, looked me dead in the eyes and lied again, saying it was great, just a girl's night. I couldn't believe it. I told her I'd gone by the wine bar and didn't see her there. That was the first time I saw her crack. She stammered a bit, saying they'd moved to another place. But before she could dig herself deeper, I cut her off and told her I'd seen her with Adam. Her face went white, and for a split second, I thought maybe she'd feel guilty, maybe she'd apologize or show some regret. But instead, she did something that floored me. She got angry. She started accusing me of stalking her, saying I was being controlling, and that I was the reason she needed space in the first place. It was like she'd completely turned the tables, making me out to be the bad guy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, she still refused to admit she'd done anything wrong. She claimed that Adam was just supporting her, that they needed each other, because I was always too focused on work. I tried to stay calm, but her lies kept piling up. I told her she had to be honest with me, no more games, no more blaming me. Finally, after a lot of back and forth, she admitted they'd been seeing each other. But she made it sound so casual, like it was no big deal. She even had the nerve to say she didn't think it would hurt me this much. At that moment, something inside me broke. I realized I'd been holding on to a version of her that didn't exist anymore, maybe never existed. I'd trusted her with everything, and she'd thrown it all away, acting like it was nothing. The next day, I was still reeling. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and my mind kept going back to that moment in the restaurant and the way Jess had lied right to my face. As if things couldn't get worse, I knew I'd have to tell my parents. They'd always been close to Adam, almost coddling him, but I thought even they would have to see that what he did was crossing a line. I was wrong. When I called my parents and told them everything, how Jess and Adam had betrayed me, their response was unexpected, to say the least. At first, my mom was quiet, and then she just sighed and said, "Ethan, maybe you're overreacting a bit. Relationships are complicated. Maybe you weren't paying enough attention to Jess, and she needed someone to be there for her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were acting like I was the one to blame, like somehow it was my fault that my own brother had slept with my wife. My dad chimed in, too, saying things like, "Adam's been through a lot, maybe he needed someone to confide in." It was as if they were bending over backward to justify Adam's actions, while completely ignoring the pain I was going through. After a while, I just stopped trying to explain. I realized they weren't going to see it my way, and honestly, it felt like I'd lost not only my wife and my brother, but also my parents in one fell swoop. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. It felt like my entire family had turned their backs on me, rallying around Adam as if he was the victim. The conversation ended with my mom saying, "You and Jess just need to work through this." Adam was only trying to help her, and things got out of hand. I hung up, numb, wondering if they'd ever really seen me or cared about what I was going through. That was the moment I knew I was truly on my own in this. In the days that followed, I felt like I was living in a fog. Jess was still at the house, acting as if everything was normal, like she hadn't completely shattered my trust. I think she assumed I'd eventually get over it, or just move on, because it was just sex, as she put it. She'd occasionally try to talk to me, usually giving some half-baked excuse for why she needed Adam, and how it wasn't personal. I started avoiding her as much as possible, not trusting myself to hold back the anger and bitterness building inside me. Adam had the nerve to text me, too. He actually wrote, "Hey man, I'm sorry things got weird, but Jess needed someone to talk to. I didn't mean to hurt you." I couldn't believe the lack of remorse. He acted like he'd just borrowed a tool from me without asking, not like he'd betrayed his own brother. The absolute gall of it left me speechless. Even though I'd lost almost everyone I'd trusted, I started reflecting on the last few years of my life and seeing things more clearly. Jess's lies weren't new, she'd just gotten more brazen over time. I thought about all the times she'd been late, all the times she'd gone on girls' nights or weekend trips with friends, and I realized those little moments I'd brushed off were probably filled with lies, too. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often I'd put everyone else's feelings before my own. I'd always let Adam get away with things, always forgiven Jess for her coldness, all because I wanted to keep the peace. But now, I was done. Done feeling like I was in the wrong for caring, done making excuses for people who'd shown they didn't care about me. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel everything fully, the betrayal, the hurt, the anger. I didn't hold back, and honestly, that release was the first step toward clarity. I knew that I needed to take action, that this wasn't something I could just live with or sweep under the rug. Once I'd accepted that things would never go back to normal, I knew I had to make some hard decisions. I couldn't keep living under the same roof as Jess, pretending like things were okay. I wanted her out, and I wanted to cut ties with Adam, too. But I knew my family wouldn't make it easy. First, I spoke to Jess, told her I wanted a divorce. She acted shocked, as if she couldn't believe I was serious. She tried everything, begging, making excuses, even saying we could start fresh. She blamed our problems on my distance and claimed she had no one else to lean on. Hearing her twist the story only made me angrier. I told her I couldn't trust her, not after everything she'd done with my own brother. Then, out of nowhere, she switched tactics. She got defensive and tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "You're really going to break up our marriage over one mistake? You don't know what it's like to feel unloved." As if I hadn't spent years trying to make things work, as if this wasn't something she'd been doing behind my back for who knows how long. I'd never seen this side of her, this manipulative, almost cruel side, where she used my own loyalty against me. After that conversation, it became crystal clear, Jess didn't regret what she'd done, she regretted getting caught. And Adam? He hadn't even tried to apologize beyond that lousy text. He probably thought that because our parents were on his side, everything would eventually blow over. But I was done with them. I wanted a clean break, and that included distancing myself from my so-called family. My plan was simple: I'd start the divorce process, figure out my options, and cut out the people who'd betrayed me. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew my family would fight me on it, but staying would mean losing myself entirely. So I contacted a lawyer, began gathering everything I needed to make my exit from this nightmare of a marriage. And even though it felt painful, like ripping away from the life I thought I had, it also felt like freedom. For the first time in a long time, I had control over my own life. As soon as word got out to my parents that I'd filed for divorce, the backlash started. My mom called me immediately, her voice full of shock and disappointment. She couldn't believe I was throwing everything away over what she called a misunderstanding. She kept saying that family sticks together no matter what, and that I should have just worked things out with Jess and Adam. The way she said it, you'd think I was the one who betrayed them, not the other way around. My dad chimed in, too, saying things like, "Son, you've got to forgive people. That's what makes families strong." It was like they couldn't grasp the depth of what had happened. To them, Adam was still the favorite son, and I was just supposed to get over it. I tried to explain, to make them see that I couldn't trust Jess or Adam anymore, that this wasn't just a minor issue I could forgive and forget. But every time I spoke, they just shut me down, insisting that I was being too dramatic and selfish. They even suggested that I should apologize to Adam for being so cold toward him after the mistake he'd made. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, their complete disregard for my feelings, their refusal to hold Adam or Jess accountable. It felt like a betrayal on top of a betrayal. Eventually, I just stopped trying. I knew they weren't going to understand. They'd made their choice, and I had to make mine. It hurt, realizing that my own parents had sided with the people who'd hurt me the most. But I couldn't let that stop me from moving forward. So I cut contact. I stopped answering their calls, stopped letting their opinions weigh me down. I knew this path would be lonelier, but I also knew that staying connected to people who didn't respect me would be worse. It was time to let go, even if it meant losing the family I'd always known. After cutting off contact with my family, I was left feeling like a stranger in my own life. I'd lost my wife, my brother, and now, in a way, my parents, too. I thought I could handle it alone, but the silence was deafening. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of the life I'd thought I had, photos of Jess and me from better days, texts from my mom asking why I was destroying the family, and a dozen other little things that made it hard to breathe. But I knew I needed to keep going, so I started reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in a while, old friends, a few coworkers, people who knew me before all of this. It was awkward at first, but soon I realized they were genuinely there for me. They'd been shocked by what I'd gone through and offered support in ways I never expected. They didn't judge, didn't tell me I was overreacting, didn't try to justify Jess's or Adam's behavior. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. One friend, in particular, an old college buddy named Matt, became a rock for me. He'd been through a messy divorce himself a few years back, so he knew exactly what I was dealing with. He told me straight up, "You've got to let yourself grieve. This was your life, your family, it's normal to feel like everything's crashing down." Those words hit me hard. I'd been trying so hard to be strong, to push through, that I hadn't let myself just feel. With Matt's support, I started to slowly reclaim parts of my life. We'd go out for drinks, hit the gym, and even signed up for a hiking group to keep my mind off things. And bit by bit, the weight started to lift. I could finally see a way forward, a life where I didn't need validation from people who couldn't respect me. And even though it was painful, I was beginning to accept that sometimes, walking away was the only way to truly heal. Once I was mentally ready, I threw myself into the divorce proceedings. I knew Jess wouldn't make things easy, but I was determined to get through it. True to form, she tried every angle she could think of to manipulate the situation. She acted wounded, telling our mutual friends that I was the one who'd given up on us and painting herself as the victim. It was almost laughable, if it hadn't been so infuriating. The worst part was when she actually tried to claim part of the savings I'd built before we'd even married. She argued that she deserved it because she'd been with me through the years I'd built up my career, and therefore was entitled to half of everything. Watching her twist the story to her advantage made me see just how little she'd ever respected me or my efforts. I couldn't believe that I'd once trusted her with my future. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. My lawyer helped me push back, laying out the facts and reminding Jess that she'd been unfaithful, that she'd crossed boundaries that couldn't be ignored. As the proceedings dragged on, I felt a strange kind of strength building inside me. I realized that fighting for myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I was done letting people take advantage of my kindness. The process took months, but each step brought me closer to closure. Jess eventually gave up on most of her demands, probably realizing that I wasn't going to cave. By the end, I felt drained but proud. I'd faced down the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal, and I'd held my ground. The divorce was finally finalized, and with that signature, I felt the last chains fall away. I was free. The months after the divorce were a blur of new beginnings. I moved into a small apartment, which felt like a fresh start, a place that was mine, with no reminders of the life Jess and I had built together. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd wake up to an empty space, the silence settling over me in a way that was both comforting and overwhelming. But with time, I learned to appreciate the solitude. I had space to think, to breathe, and to really process everything that had happened. I kept seeing Matt, who had become a great source of support throughout the whole ordeal. He'd encourage me to get out of my head, push me to go out and enjoy life again. And slowly, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried for years, the guy who liked to go hiking on weekends, who enjoyed a good beer with friends, who could laugh at the little things. But more than anything, I started to realize how much I had grown through the whole mess. Sure, it was painful, and I'd been burned in ways I never imagined. But I learned that I could stand up for myself, that I didn't need anyone's approval to live my life. Jess and Adam had taken a lot from me, but they also gave me a hard lesson in self-respect, and I wasn't going to forget that. One night, after a long week of work, I sat down and thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights. And you know what? I felt stronger. I didn't feel like the guy who had been cheated on anymore. I felt like someone who had fought through the worst, made hard choices, and come out the other side with his head held high. If there's one thing I've learned from this entire experience, it's this: you can't control what others do to you, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to stay in the toxic situation, keep making excuses, or you can choose to cut ties and take control of your life. It's not easy, and it's not pretty, but it's necessary for growth. So, to anyone reading this who's been betrayed, take your time, heal at your own pace, but don't let anyone, not even family, guilt you into staying in a situation that hurts you. You deserve better. And as for Jess and Adam, I'm done. I don't need them in my life to be happy. I have myself, and that's enough.